Daf Yomi Tractate Bava Metzia, page 104b, top of the page, with the words Ahani Kasiva Ligarayon, etc. 104b, top of the page, Bava Metzia, Daf Yomi. The Gemara answers, the writing of this statement in the document is effective for depreciation. If the collateral depreciates in value, the creditor may claim the remainder of the debt from the debtor's property. Rav Yossi, the Gemara continues, Rav Yossi would also expound a common language, as it is taught in Bride, that Rav Yossi says in a location where they were accustomed to formulate the terms of a marriage contract as one would formulate the terms of a loan. In other words, the precise value of her dowry is written in the marriage contract. Then upon termination of the marriage due to divorce or the husband's death, the wife collects the sum of her dowry as a creditor would collect payment of a loan. In other words, she receives the entire sum recorded as her dowry. Conversely, in a place where the custom is to double the written sum of the dowry in the marriage contract to honor the bride, so that it should appear as though her father is providing her husband with a considerable dowry, she collects only half of the sum written in the marriage contract. The Gemara relates, the sages in Darda collected, in other words, allowed the wife to collect 1/3 of the stated sum, as the custom in their location was to write 3 times the actual amount of the dowry in the marriage contract. Maremar would allow the wife to collect even the added value of those sums that the father of the bride had written in the marriage contract in honor of his daughter. Ravina said to Maremar, but isn't it taught in the bride that a location where the custom is to record double the amount, she collects only half? Our answer is this is not difficult. In this case, when Maremar allowed the wife to collect the full sum, the husband performed an act of acquisition for the entire written amount with the father of the bride. Whereas in that case, where the bride rules that she collects only a portion of the sum written for the dowry, the husband did not perform an act of acquisition for the entire written amount with the father of the bride. Therefore, the wife could collect the sum of her dowry only in accordance with the regular custom. The Gemara relates that Ravina wrote an enhancement of the value of the dowry for his daughter in her marriage contract, in keeping with the accepted custom. The groom's family says, Ravina, let us perform an act of acquisition with the master so that he would be required to give that entire sum as the dowry. Ravina said to them, if you wish to perform an act of acquisition, I will not double the sum of the dowry, but will record the actual sum I intend to provide. If you prefer that I record double the sum of the dowry in the marriage contract, I will not allow you to perform an act of acquisition. Okay. The Gemara cites a related incident. There was a certain man who said to his inheritors before his death, give 400 dinars to my daughter in her marriage contract. Rav Acha, the son of Rav Avia, or Rav Avia, sent the following question to be asked before Rav Ashi. What was that man's intention? Did he mean an actual dowry of 400 dinars, which are written as 800, or 400 dinars written in the marriage contract, which are actually a dowry of 200 dinars. She said, we examined the matter. If he said give her, then he meant to give her 400 dinars, which are written as 800 dinars. But if he said write for her, then he meant to write 400 dinars, which are 200 in practice. There are those who say a different version of Rav Ashi's ruling. Rav Ashi said, we examine the matter. If he said for her marriage contract, he meant 400 dinars, with which are written 800, because he indicated that this is the sum he wants to give her for her dowry. But if he said in her marriage contract, it was clearly referring to the written amount, and it is assumed that he meant to write 400 dinars, which are 200 in practice. The Gemara comments, and that is not so. There is no difference whether he said for her marriage contract, and there is no difference whether he said in her marriage contract. In either case, her dowry is written as 400 dinars, which are 200 in practice, unless he simply said give her without specification, without mentioning the marriage contract. In that case, the full sum is given as a dowry. The Gemara relates another incident. There was a certain man who received land from another to cultivate. He said, if I fail to work the land, but instead let it lie fallow, I will give you 1,000 dinars. He let 1/3 of it lie fallow. The sages of Nardas said the halacha is that he gives him 333.5 dinars, 1/3 of the stipulated amount, as compensation for neglecting 1/3 of the field. Bava said this kind of agreement is a transaction with inconclusive consent, and since an asmachta does not affect acquisition, he need not pay. Okay. The Gemara asks, according to Rava, in what way is it different from that which we learned in the Mishnah concerning one who wrote, if I let the field lie fallow and do not cultivate it, I will pay with best quality produce? The Gemara answers, there he did not exaggerate, but simply said he will pay for the owner's losses from best quality produce, whereas here he said something extra. In other words, he promised to give an excessively large sum of money. He is merely exaggerating. It is therefore not viewed as an actual monetary obligation, but as an asmachta. Gemara relates, there was a certain man acting as a sharecropper who received land for planting sesame, which typically weakens the land but yields larger short-term profits. But he planted it with wheat instead. That year the field produced wheat at a value similar to that of the sesame. Rav Kahana thought, saying that the owner must deduct the usual amount of deterioration of the land from planting sesame from his own share, since by planting wheat the sharecropper had spared the owner the damage to his field, while the owner had received the same profit. Rav Ashi said to Rav Kahana, people say the following proverb, let the land be weakened, but do not weaken its owner. People prefer a quick profit and discount the damage to their land. Therefore, the sharecropper is not entitled to a larger share of the field for having spared the owner from the weakening of his field. The Gemara relates another incident. There was a certain man who received land for planting sesame, and he planted it with wheat. Ultimately, it produced more wheat than the usual value of sesame. Ravina thought to say that the owner must give the cultivator the added value, that is the difference between this and actual value of the wheat, and that the expected value of the sesame. Rav Acha of Difti said to Ravina, is that to say that the cultivator alone enhanced its value, but the land did not help to enhance it? Rather, they should divide the extra sum between them. A common type of business venture was one where the capital or merchandise was supplied by the one and managed by another, who would receive the share, commonly half of the profits for his efforts. This arrangement can also be viewed as one where the investor is lending half of the invested capital or merchandise to the master, with the manager agreeing to supervise the venture in exchange for receiving the loan in order to avoid violating the prohibition of interest. The investor agrees to accept a greater share of the possible loss. In other words, 2/3, then half the profits, 1/2. The sages Narda said, with regard to its halachic status, a joint venture is considered a half loan and half deposit. As sages formulated an enactment that would be satisfactory for the borrower, in other words, the manager, and equally satisfactory for the lender, the investor. Okay? Now that we have said half the capital is viewed as a loan, it would appear that the manager may use the money in any way he chooses. If he wants to drink alcohol with it, he may well do so, regardless of any objection on the part of the investor. Rava disagreed and said it is for this reason that it is called a joint venture. As the investor concedes to the manager, when I gave the money to you, it was to use it for business and not to drink alcohol with it. Rav Edi Bravin said, and according to this reasoning, if the messenger died, it becomes movable property in the possession of his children. Therefore, it may not be taken from them as movable property inherited by orphans. It is lien for the payment of their father's debts. Bava disagreed and said, it is for this reason that it is called a joint venture, so that if he died, it does not become movable property in the possession of his brethren. It's considered a partnership on the loan. Bava says, if two people conducted one joint venture and drafted it as separate ventures of equal value in two separate documents, and they suffered a heavy loss from the venture recorded in one of the documents and had a slight gain from the other, the halacha is as follows. The two documents are treated as two separate agreements, and one does not calculate the profits and losses from the two ventures together. Therefore, this will be to the detriment of the lender. According to the common arrangement, he will gain half of the profits from one venture and suffer 2/3 of the loss, and suffer 2/3 of the loss of the other. That was page 104a.